There's a ship at sail, and it's a rough crossing. On board, the German composer Carl Maria von Weber is on his way to England for an extended and ill-fated stay. Weber's doctor has advised him not to travel. He's gravely ill with tuberculosis, and he will suffer in the smog of industrial London, but his family is desperate for the money. And he's excited. He's been learning English specially, and he delights in the way the language now trips off his tongue. It's 1826, and Weber has been invited to compose a new English language opera for Covent Garden. It's now 5 years since the international success of Der Freischütz in 1821. On his arrival in England, the new opera isn't finished yet, and he's still got a great deal of work to do on that overture, the overture that is to become a standard of the concert repertoire, the overture that brings together themes from the entire opera to give the essence of the story in instrumental form. Oberon, the fairy king, and his wife Titania, the fairy queen, have had an argument with each other and fallen out, and the plot to reconcile them will be led by Puck. This sounds like a Shakespearean story, doesn't it? As in the case of that other great overture, also from 1826, Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream overture. But the story here isn't based on Shakespeare's play, though Shakespeare did borrow characters and ideas from the same medieval romance on which Weber's opera is based. And in fact, Mendelssohn himself appears to have borrowed material from elsewhere in Weber's opera for use in his Midsummer Night's Dream overture. But no, this isn't Shakespeare. Instead, in Weber's opera, Oberon and Puck plot to break off the imminent marriage of Reza, daughter of the Caliph of Baghdad, to one Prince Babakan. And through a series of visions, Reza is introduced to Sir Huon of Bordeaux. He is under orders from Emperor Charlemagne to marry Reza, and by a series of supernatural interventions choreographed by the fairies, the couple are guided to this destiny. Even just the slow introduction to Weber's overture gives an account of the entire arc of the story in miniature, opening with a solo from the magic horn, which is heard throughout the opera. The horn which accompanied Huon's vision of Reza in Act 1, and which, in the final scene, transported Reza and Huon magically from a burning pyre to the court of Charlemagne, where Huon is pardoned for his misdeeds. We hear the tender, passionate sighs from the strings, punctuated by chromatic chords of fairy music in the woodwind, reminding us that the romantic fate of Reza and Huon is being stage managed from within that light-footed fairy world inhabited by Oberon and Titania. And finally, closing the introduction, the fanfare of Emperor Charlemagne himself, ready to pardon Huon, music from the opera's final scene, but here in muted form. Now, of course, follows the allegro, in which we hear the gusts of breeze that will blow into the sails of Huon's boat as he escapes from the Caliph with Reza. Weber, understandably, is at home with the depiction of a rough sea crossing, but here, in the opera, the storm grows so violent it ends with their ship wrecked and Huon praying for Reza's life. And amongst the valiant bravery of Huon, we hear, in the second theme, the music which expresses his more tender, romantic sentiments towards the end of Act 1. The tender strains of Weber's writing caught the ear of many, including the young Mendelssohn, who, playing violin in an early performance of the Oberon Overture, appears to have looked further into the opera and quoted the lyrical mermaid song from Act 2 in the closing bars of his Midsummer Night's Dream Overture. Mendelssohn's purpose here has been widely debated, but Mendelssohn scholar Larry Todd suggested that perhaps the young Felix may have been alluding to Act 2, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's play, where Oberon recalls having heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath, that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music. The opera was a huge success in London, though, in the end, the heavy schedule of composing, rehearsing, performing and socialising took the ultimate toll on Weber's health. On the 5th of June, less than 2 months after the triumphant premiere, Weber, still in London, went to bed and closed his eyes for the last time. Tragically, it was the night before he was scheduled to return home to Germany, and Oberon became his swan song. His funeral took place a month later at St Mary Moorfields, with music from Mozart's Requiem. What music could be more fitting than the swan song of his greatest operatic predecessor? And it was his great operatic successor, Richard Wagner, who led the campaign for Weber's body to be relocated to Dresden, where it was finally transported in 1844. It was Wagner, too, who composed a funeral symphony for the occasion and read the eulogy. And Weber's music, too, was returned to Germany, as Oberon was revised and adapted into a German language version, the version of the opera which is most frequently performed today, but which Weber himself never heard. Even after Weber's death, his show continued.